2 weeks later, my mother-in-law was standing in her kitchen surrounded by ruined birthday decorations, mascara streaking down her cheeks, while 37 family members sat in stunned silence around her dining table. The stack of medical bills I'd just read aloud was still clutched in my trembling hands. Her perfectly sculpted nose, the one she'd spent $12,000 on, was red and blotchy from crying. But at that moment, as I watched her designer world crumble around her manicured fingernails, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years of marriage: complete and total satisfaction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've staged something extra special for you. It started on a Tuesday evening in October. I was standing in my kitchen, stirring a pot of homemade marinara sauce, when my husband Marcus walked through the door with that particular expression he wore whenever his mother had been in his ear. His shoulders were tight, his smile forced, and he was doing that thing where he loosened his tie like it was strangling him. "How was your day?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would involve some version of whatever poison Delphine Romano had dripped into his consciousness during their weekly lunch meeting. My mother-in-law had perfected the art of criticism disguised as concern, and Marcus, bless his heart, still hadn't figured out how to decode her manipulations. He kissed my forehead and mumbled something about traffic, but I could see the tension in his jaw. We'd been married for 3 years, and I'd learned to read the signs. Delphine had planted another seed of doubt, another small suggestion that maybe his wife wasn't quite measuring up to the Romano family standards. "She mentioned the Christmas party again," he said finally, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair. "She's worried about the guest list this year. Apparently, some of Dad's business partners will be there." I turned down the heat under the sauce and faced him fully. "And?" Marcus ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture I recognized as his attempt to organize whatever twisted logic his mother had handed him. "She just thinks maybe you should consider getting a personal trainer, before the holidays. She knows this great guy who works with executives' wives." The wooden spoon in my hand suddenly felt heavier. "She said that?" "Not exactly like that," Marcus backtracked quickly. "She's just concerned about your health. She cares about you, Elena. We both do." I stared at my husband, this man I'd fallen in love with precisely because he'd seemed different from his family's superficial obsessions. When we'd met at a bookstore 4 years ago, he'd been reading philosophy and drinking coffee from a chipped mug. He'd seemed immune to the materialism that defined the Romano legacy. Now, standing in our kitchen, he was parroting his mother's thinly veiled insults about my size 14 figure as if they were medical advice. Did she actually say the words personal trainer, or did she suggest something else? I asked, keeping my voice level. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. She may have mentioned that dress shopping might be easier if you dropped a few pounds before the holidays. There it was, the truth buried under layers of false concern and family politics. Delphine Romano, with her size 2 frame and her monthly Botox appointments, had decided that her daughter-in-law's natural curves were an embarrassment to the family image. I turned back to the stove and continued stirring, but my mind was racing. This wasn't the first time Delphine had made comments about my appearance. There had been the subtle suggestion that I might want to try her dermatologist for my skin concerns, the gift certificate to a high-end salon that specialized in transformative makeovers, the constant recommendations for juice cleanses and detox teas that she had casually mentioned during family dinners. But this felt different, more direct, more targeted. "I'm perfect the way I am," I said quietly, not looking at Marcus. "Of course you are," he replied automatically, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The damage had already been done. His mother had successfully planted the idea that maybe, just maybe, his wife could use some improvement. That night, I lay awake listening to Marcus breathe beside me, replaying every interaction I'd had with his mother over the past 3 years. Delphine Romano was a master manipulator, but she was also something else, a hypocrite of the highest order. While she criticized my natural appearance, she'd spent the last 2 decades systematically reconstructing her own face and body through surgical procedures that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I'd seen the evidence accidentally months earlier when I helped her organize her home office during a family gathering. Medical bills and correspondence from various plastic surgeons had been scattered across her desk, and while I hadn't read them intentionally, I'd glimpsed enough to understand the scope of her artificial transformation. Rhinoplasty, breast augmentation, liposuction, facial fillers, laser treatments, the list was extensive and expensive. The irony was staggering. The woman who criticized my natural body had spent over $40,000 trying to achieve what she considered physical perfection, and she still felt entitled to judge others for not meeting her manufactured standards. As I stared at the ceiling, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't fully developed yet, just a kernel of an idea, but it felt right in a way that Marcus's suggestion of a personal trainer definitely did not. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day doing something I'd never done before. I researched Delphine Romano with the thoroughness of an investigative journalist. I started with social media, where she maintained a carefully curated image of effortless elegance and natural beauty. Every photo was filtered, every angle calculated, every caption designed to suggest that her flawless appearance was simply the result of good genes and healthy living. But I knew better now. I knew about the medical bills, the surgical procedures, the artificial enhancements that created her so-called natural beauty. And as I scrolled through 3 years of Instagram posts filled with inspirational quotes about self-love and acceptance, all while she privately criticized others for not meeting her surgically enhanced standards, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a personal trainer suggestion or dress shopping comments. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been building for years, a systematic campaign to make me feel inadequate while presenting herself as the perfect example of what a Romano woman should be. I thought about Marcus, about how he'd changed since we'd gotten married, how his mother's constant suggestions had slowly eroded his confidence in his own choices, including his choice to marry me. How her subtle criticisms had become his unconscious concerns, creating distance between us that hadn't existed before. Delphine Romano had been playing a long game, and I'd been too polite, too accommodating, too focused on keeping the peace to recognize it. But now I saw it clearly. She was trying to reshape me into her image of an acceptable daughter-in-law, or failing that, to convince her son that he'd made a mistake. The realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant that 3 years of family dinners, holiday celebrations, and carefully chosen gifts had all been part of an elaborate performance designed to diminish me. Liberating because it meant I could stop pretending that her behavior was motivated by genuine care or concern. I closed my laptop and looked around our cozy living room with its comfortable furniture and family photos and warm lighting that Delphine had once described as quaint, in a tone that made it clear she meant something else. This was my home, my life, my marriage, and I wasn't going to let anyone remake it according to their artificial standards. The kernel of a plan that had started forming the night before began to crystallize into something more concrete. Delphine's 60th birthday party was 2 weeks away, a lavish celebration she'd been planning for months. The entire extended family would be there, along with friends and business associates. It would be the perfect stage for the kind of revelation that would expose the hypocrisy at the heart of her carefully constructed image. I spent the rest of the day thinking through the details, considering the risks and benefits, weighing the potential consequences. By the time Marcus came home from work, I'd made my decision. I was done being the target of someone else's insecurities. It was time to level the playing field. The next morning, I did something that went against every fiber of my polite, conflict-avoiding nature. I drove to Delphine's house while she was at her weekly tennis lesson and used the spare key she'd given us for emergencies. This felt like an emergency, just not the kind she'd intended the key for. Her home office was exactly as I remembered it from that family gathering months ago, all white furniture and crystal accessories that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a workspace. I sat down at her pristine desk and opened the filing cabinet I'd seen her access before. My hands were shaking slightly as I rifled through folders labeled with mundane household categories: insurance, utilities, taxes. But buried behind household expenses was a folder marked simply medical. The contents made my stomach drop. Invoice after invoice from prestigious cosmetic surgery clinics across the city. Dr. Harrison Blackwell, facial reconstruction specialist. Beverly Hills Aesthetic Center, the Manhattan Institute for Cosmetic Enhancement. Each bill detailed procedures with clinical precision: rhinoplasty revision, upper and lower blepharoplasty, deep plane facelift, Brazilian butt lift, tummy tuck, breast augmentation with lift. The dates spanned 15 years, starting shortly after she'd married Marcus's father. The amounts were staggering: $12,000 for the nose job, $18,000 for the facelift, $22,000 for the body contouring package. The total, when I added it up on her own calculator, came to over $63,000. But it wasn't just the money that made my hands tremble as I photographed each document with my phone. It was the pattern I could see emerging. Every procedure had been scheduled around family events, holidays, or social gatherings. The breast augmentation had happened right before Marcus's college graduation. The facelift had been timed for her 25th wedding anniversary party. Even her most recent Botox injections, just 6 weeks ago, had been scheduled before a charity gala where she'd been photographed for the society pages. Delphine Romano had been systematically reconstructing herself for years, timing each enhancement to maximize its social impact. And yet she had the audacity to criticize my natural appearance as somehow inadequate for family functions. I found something else in that folder that made my blood run cold. A consultation report from Dr. Blackwell dated just 3 months ago. The subject line read, "Recommended procedures for optimal results." It was a wish list of additional surgeries Delphine was considering: a neck lift, more aggressive liposuction, and something called facial volumizing with premium fillers. At the bottom of the consultation notes, in Delphine's own handwriting, was a comment that made everything click into place. Timing dependent on daughter-in-law situation resolution. She'd been planning to give herself another round of surgical improvements, but she wanted to deal with me first. The personal trainer suggestion, the diet recommendations, the constant criticism disguised as concern, it had all been building towards something bigger. She wanted me to conform to her artificial standards before she invested in further perfecting her own artificial appearance. I photographed everything, my phone's camera clicking steadily as I documented each piece of evidence. When I was finished, I carefully returned the files to their exact positions and locked the cabinet. As I drove home, my mind was racing with possibilities. That evening, Marcus mentioned that his mother had called to discuss the seating arrangements for her birthday party. Apparently, she wanted to make sure I was placed at a table where I'd be comfortable, code for hidden away from the important guests and family business associates. She'd also taken the liberty of ordering my meal in advance, choosing the lowest calorie option on the catering menu to help with my health goals. The manipulation was so blatant it would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. But instead of feeling hurt or angry, I felt something else entirely: clarity. This woman had been orchestrating my humiliation for years, and she'd been doing it while living a lie so comprehensive it required its own filing system. Over the next week, I began crafting my response with the same methodical precision Delphine used to plan her surgical schedule. I researched each of her doctors, understanding their specialties and typical pricing. I cross-referenced the dates of her procedures with family photos from the same time periods, watching her face and body transform gradually across years of holiday gatherings and social events. The most revealing discovery came when I found her old driver's license photo from 15 years ago, tucked inside a book of family pictures Marcus had shown me when we were dating. The woman in that photo was barely recognizable as the Delphine Romano who criticized my appearance today. Her nose had been wider, her chin less defined, her lips thinner, her breasts smaller. Even her eye shape looked different, probably the result of multiple blepharoplasty procedures. I made copies of everything and organized it into a timeline that told the story of her transformation. Each surgical enhancement was documented with before and after photos, corresponding medical bills, and recovery periods that explained her mysterious spa retreats and wellness vacations over the years. But I didn't stop there. I started paying closer attention to her current routine, and what I discovered was even more damning.
The woman who recommended juice cleanses and criticized my eating habits was secretly receiving regular injections of appetite suppressants from a weight loss clinic. Her natural morning skincare routine included prescription retinoids and chemical peels that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her effortless hair color required monthly appointments with a colorist who charged $800 per session. Every aspect of Delphine's appearance was carefully managed, artificially enhanced, and surgically refined. Yet she presented herself to the world as a natural beauty who simply took good care of herself, and she used that fake authority to criticize others for not meeting her manufactured standards. I found something else in that folder that made my blood run cold. A consultation report from Dr. Blackwell dated just 3 months ago. The subject line read, "Recommended procedures for optimal results." It was a wish list of additional surgeries Delphine was considering: a neck lift, more aggressive liposuction, and something called facial volumizing with premium fillers. At the bottom of the consultation notes, in Delphine's own handwriting, was a comment that made everything click into place. Timing dependent on daughter-in-law situation resolution. She'd been planning to give herself another round of surgical improvements, but she wanted to deal with me first. The personal trainer suggestion, the diet recommendations, the constant criticism disguised as concern, it had all been building towards something bigger. She wanted me to conform to her artificial standards before she invested in further perfecting her own artificial appearance. I photographed everything, my phone's camera clicking steadily as I documented each piece of evidence. When I was finished, I carefully returned the files to their exact positions and locked the cabinet. As I drove home, my mind was racing with possibilities. That evening, Marcus mentioned that his mother had called to discuss the seating arrangements for her birthday party. Apparently, she wanted to make sure I was placed at a table where I'd be comfortable, code for hidden away from the important guests and family business associates. She'd also taken the liberty of ordering my meal in advance, choosing the lowest calorie option on the catering menu to help with my health goals. The manipulation was so blatant it would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. But instead of feeling hurt or angry, I felt something else entirely: clarity. This woman had been orchestrating my humiliation for years, and she'd been doing it while living a lie so comprehensive it required its own filing system. Over the next week, I began crafting my response with the same methodical precision Delphine used to plan her surgical schedule. I researched each of her doctors, understanding their specialties and typical pricing. I cross-referenced the dates of her procedures with family photos from the same time periods, watching her face and body transform across years of holiday gatherings and social events. The most revealing discovery came when I found her old driver's license photo from 15 years ago tucked inside a book of family pictures Marcus had shown me when we were dating. The woman in that photo was barely recognizable as the Delphine Romano who criticized my appearance today. Her nose had been wider, her chin less defined, her lips thinner, her breasts smaller. Even her eye shape looked different, probably the result of multiple blepharoplasty procedures. I made copies of everything and organized it into a timeline that told the story of her transformation. Each surgical enhancement was documented with before and after photos, corresponding medical bills, and recovery periods that explained her mysterious spa retreats and wellness vacations over the years. But I didn't stop there. I started paying closer attention to her current routine, and what I discovered was even more damning. The woman who recommended juice cleanses and criticized my eating habits was secretly receiving regular injections of appetite suppressants from a weight loss clinic. Her natural morning skincare routine included prescription retinoids and chemical peels that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her effortless hair color required monthly appointments with a colorist who charged $800 per session. Every aspect of Delphine's appearance was carefully managed, artificially enhanced, and surgically refined. Yet she
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If she'd been paying closer attention to my tone, she might have detected the undercurrent of anticipation that had been building all week. That night, I tried on the dress I'd chosen for her party. It was elegant but simple, black with clean lines that flattered my curves without apologizing for them. More importantly, it had deep pockets, perfect for carrying the envelope that would contain copies of 15 years' worth of cosmetic surgery receipts. Marcus found me standing in front of our bedroom mirror, and his face lit up with genuine appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said, and for the first time in weeks, I heard no uncertainty in his voice, no echo of his mother's criticisms. "Thank you," I said, meaning it, because I did look beautiful, exactly as I was, and it had taken Delphine's relentless campaign against my self-confidence to remind me of that truth. The morning of the party, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. I'd spent 2 weeks planning this moment, and I felt ready. Not nervous, not angry, just ready to restore some balance to a relationship that had been tilted in Delphine's favor for far too long. As I got dressed and carefully placed the envelope in my pocket, I thought about all the family dinners where I'd smiled politely while she made subtle digs about my appearance. All the times I'd second-guessed my clothing choices because of her comments. All the moments when I'd felt inadequate in my own marriage because someone else's impossible standards had become the measuring stick. Today, those standards would be revealed for what they really were, the artificial creation of someone who'd spent more money on her appearance than most people spend on their houses. I was about to give Delphine Romano the birthday gift she truly deserved: the truth. The Romano estate was decorated like something from a magazine spread. White roses cascaded from crystal vases on every surface, and string lights twinkled across the manicured garden where 37 family members and close friends had gathered to celebrate Delphine's 60th birthday. She moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, accepting compliments on her ageless beauty and natural elegance with practiced modesty. I watched her from my assigned table in the corner, strategically positioned behind a large floral arrangement where the important guests wouldn't have to look at me directly. Marcus sat beside me, handsome in his navy suit, making polite conversation with his cousin Vincent about real estate markets. He seemed relaxed, probably relieved that I'd chosen to attend without causing any drama about the seating arrangements or menu selection. Delphine had outdone herself with the party planning. There was a 3-tier cake decorated with edible pearls, a champagne fountain, and a string quartet playing classical music on the terrace. She'd hired professional photographers to capture every moment, ensuring that her milestone birthday would be documented with the same attention to detail she applied to everything else in her carefully curated life. Around 7:30, after the cocktail hour and before dinner service, Delphine's sister Patricia tapped a knife against her champagne flute to call for attention. The crowd gradually quieted as Patricia prepared to give the traditional family toast, a yearly tradition that usually involved glowing tributes to Delphine's wisdom, generosity, and timeless beauty. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Patricia began, her voice carrying across the garden. "As we celebrate my sister's 60th birthday, I'm reminded of how blessed we are to have someone so inspiring in our lives. Delphine has always been an example of grace, authenticity, and natural beauty that comes from within." The guests murmured their agreement, raising their glasses as Patricia continued with anecdotes about childhood memories and sisterly admiration. I felt the envelope in my pocket, its edges sharp against my palm, and waited for the right moment. When Patricia finished her toast and the applause died down, I stood up slowly. The movement caught Delphine's attention from across the garden, and I saw her eyebrows furrow slightly as she realized I was preparing to speak. This wasn't part of the planned program, and Delphine Romano did not appreciate deviations from her carefully orchestrated events. "I'd love to add something, if I may," I called out, my voice clear and confident. The guests turned toward me with polite interest, probably expecting a brief tribute from the daughter-in-law who'd been seated safely out of the spotlight. Marcus looked up at me with surprise. "Elena, you don't have to," he started, but I was already moving toward the center of the gathering, the envelope growing heavier in my pocket with each step. "I've been part of this family for 3 years now," I began, smiling warmly at the assembled guests. "And in that time, I've learned so much from Delphine about beauty, appearance, and the importance of maintaining certain standards." Delphine's expression shifted from confusion to concern as she realized this wasn't going to be a conventional toast. She started moving toward me, probably hoping to redirect the conversation before I said something inappropriate, but I continued speaking. Just this week, in fact, Delphine was kind enough to suggest that I might benefit from working with a personal trainer before the holidays.
She's always been so thoughtful about helping family members improve themselves. I paused, letting the words settle over the crowd. Some guests nodded approvingly, familiar with Delphine's reputation for helpful suggestions about diet and exercise. It got me thinking about self-improvement and the lengths people go to achieve their ideal appearance. And I realized I wanted to share something special tonight, something that really showcases Delphine's dedication to looking her absolute best. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and held it up like a gift. This is a timeline I put together, documenting Delphine's incredible transformation over the past 15 years. It's really quite remarkable what someone can achieve with the right investments. The garden had gone completely silent. Even the string quartet seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and let their music fade away. Delphine's face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup, and she was moving toward me more urgently now. "Elena, I don't think this is the time," she started, but I was already opening the envelope. "Oh, but it's perfect timing," I replied brightly. "Everyone's here, you look absolutely stunning, and I think people would be fascinated to learn about your journey to such natural beauty." I pulled out the first document, a before photo from 15 years ago, alongside a recent glamour shot. This is Delphine in 2009, around the time she married Marcus's father. And here she is today. Isn't the transformation incredible? I held up both photos so the guests could see them clearly. The difference was startling when displayed side by side, and I heard several sharp intakes of breath from the crowd. Delphine's sister Patricia moved closer, squinting at the images with obvious confusion. Now, some people might assume this is just the result of good skincare and healthy living, I continued, my voice still pleasant and conversational. But I discovered that Delphine has actually been quite strategic about achieving these results. I pulled out the medical bills, one by one, holding each one high enough for everyone to see the clinic letterheads and procedure descriptions. Dr. Harrison Blackwell, rhinoplasty revision, $12,000. Beverly Hills Aesthetic Center, breast augmentation with lift, $18,000. Manhattan Institute for Cosmetic Enhancement, deep plane facelift, $22,000. With each bill I read aloud, Delphine seemed to shrink smaller. Her perfectly reconstructed face was a mask of horror and humiliation as 15 years of surgical secrecy was exposed in front of her entire social circle. "The total investment comes to just over $63,000, I announced, consulting the calculator printout I'd prepared, which is really quite impressive when you consider the results. I mean, look at this transformation." Marcus had risen from his seat and was staring at his mother with a mixture of shock and recognition. I could see him mentally reviewing years of family photos, probably realizing for the first time why his mother had looked subtly different after each of her mysterious spa retreats and wellness vacations.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with cosmetic surgery, I continued, my tone still warm and admiring. I think it's wonderful that Delphine found ways to feel confident about her appearance. What I find interesting is how someone who's invested so heavily in artificial enhancement feels qualified to criticize others for not meeting her surgically perfected standards. The silence was deafening. 37 people stood frozen in place, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, as the weight of my revelation settled over the perfectly decorated garden. Delphine's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, each medical bill another crack in the facade she'd maintained for over a decade. "Elena, stop this immediately," she finally managed to say, her voice shaking with rage and embarrassment. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" I asked innocently. "I thought I was just sharing some inspiring information about self-improvement. After all, you've never hesitated to share your thoughts about my appearance with the entire family." Her sister Patricia was staring at the medical bills with obvious shock. "Delphine, is this real? You've had all these procedures?" Other guests were beginning to murmur among themselves, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place as they remembered comments Delphine had made about natural beauty and genetic advantages. The society photographer she'd hired was still taking pictures, capturing every moment of her public humiliation for posterity. "I think what we can all learn from this," I said, addressing the crowd one final time, is that perhaps people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, especially when those glass houses are built on a foundation of surgical receipts and injectable fillers. I tucked the papers back into the envelope and smiled at Delphine, who was now visibly trembling with fury and shame. Happy 60th birthday. I hope this party is everything you deserve. The aftermath was swift and spectacular. Within minutes, half the guests had made polite excuses and hurried toward their cars, unwilling to be associated with the social carnage I'd just unleashed. Those who remained clustered in small groups, whispering urgently about what they'd witnessed and probably questioning everything they thought they knew about their hostess. Marcus found me by the champagne fountain, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd damaged my marriage along with his mother's reputation. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." I braced myself for his anger, his disappointment, his demand that I apologize for humiliating his mother in front of everyone who mattered to their family's social standing. Instead, he asked, "How long has she been saying things like that to you?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected him to defend his mother, to minimize the significance of her criticism, to ask me to smooth things over for the sake of family harmony. But there was something different in his eyes now, a clarity that hadn't been there before. 3 years, I said softly, since the day we got engaged. He nodded slowly, pieces of his own puzzle falling into place. I should have seen it. I should have protected you from that. Behind us, Delphine was trying to salvage what remained of her party, but the damage was done. Her secret was out, her authority on matters of beauty and appearance permanently undermined, and her ability to criticize others from her pedestal of supposed natural perfection utterly destroyed. As we walked to our car that night, leaving the ruins of Delphine's birthday celebration behind us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years of marriage: complete and total peace. The woman who had spent years trying to tear down my confidence had finally been exposed for what she really was, and the husband who'd been manipulated into doubting his own judgment had finally seen the truth. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about balance, truth, and the simple satisfaction of watching someone face the consequences of their own hypocrisy. And if Delphine Romano wanted to rebuild her reputation after this, she'd have to do it without using me as her stepping stone. The weeks following Delphine's birthday party brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Word of what happened spread through their social circle faster than wildfire, and the Romano family's reputation took a hit that would take years to recover from. Marcus received several calls from relatives asking if the medical bills were legitimate, and each conversation seemed to chip away at whatever remaining illusions he'd held about his mother's character. Delphine herself went into complete social hibernation. She canceled her monthly charity committee meetings, postponed her planned surgical consultation with Dr. Blackwell, and even skipped her regular tennis lessons at the country club. The woman who had thrived on being the center of attention suddenly couldn't bear the thought of facing anyone who'd witnessed her public humiliation. Marcus and I spent those weeks having conversations we should have had years ago. He apologized repeatedly for allowing his mother's criticism to influence how he saw me, and I could see him mentally reviewing every suggestion she'd made about my appearance, my choices, my worthiness as a Romano wife. The spell she'd cast over him was finally broken, and our marriage began to feel like a partnership again, rather than a constant audition for someone else's approval. 3 months later, we received a formal invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at the Romano estate. It was printed on expensive cardstock with elegant calligraphy, as if the extra formality could somehow erase what had happened at the birthday party. Marcus wanted to decline, but I surprised him by accepting. When we arrived that Thursday, Delphine greeted us at the door with a strained smile and careful politeness. She looked smaller somehow, less commanding, and I noticed she'd toned down her usual dramatic makeup. We made it through dinner with stilted conversation about safe topics, like weather and sports, both of us dancing around the elephant in the room. As we prepared to leave, Delphine walked us to the door and did something unexpected. She apologized.
Not fully, not with the depth of acknowledgement the situation deserved, but it was something. I may have been too harsh in my suggestions, she said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. Family should support each other. I smiled and thanked her for dinner, knowing that this lukewarm apology was probably the best I'd ever get from someone like Delphine Romano. But it didn't matter anymore. She'd lost her power over me the moment I'd stood up in her garden and revealed the truth about her artificial perfection. Looking back, I don't regret what I did at that birthday party. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to expose their hypocrisy in front of everyone who matters to them. Delphine had spent years undermining my confidence while hiding behind a facade of surgical enhancement, and she'd gotten away with it because nobody had ever called her out. The truth has a way of leveling the playing field, and sometimes that's exactly what a situation needs. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.